It's time for a big update on Joe Burrow's haircut. Oh, wait, sorry, we scratched that story. We're going to give you a Joe Burrow practice update from Tuesday.
Is that hair real?
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. We appreciate all you everydayers out there and everyone who makes us their first listen as part of their everyday routine as we keep you up to date on all things Cincinnati Bengals, including what's going on with Joe Burrow in the one open practice we get per week. And as we record this episode on Tuesday, that was earlier today, Joe Burrow back in action for the Bengals. He's been participating in all of these practices to a more or less full extent since they've been open to the media as he recovers from that wrist injury. James, what stood out to you today as you were watching practice?
Well, it kind of contradicts what you just said, but it really isn't a big deal. But he did, for a second straight week, take some reps off. Just some. Now, was still in during team periods, was still doing everything. And I think it's May. It was hot as crap out, in the sun, all of the above. Give him a few reps off. That said, what stood out is he's throwing as far, I think, as we've seen him. You saw the clip and mentioned it, the deep ball to Andrei Iosivas. But it's really the same old story from an offseason narrative perspective over the past few weeks. Off platform, play action, under center play action. I have video of a deep ball to Trenton Irwin where he's under center, play action, rolls, launches across his body on the opposite side of the field and hits Trenton Irwin for a touchdown. So they are working the off platform stuff. They are working the play action, some of the under center stuff, certainly. And I do wonder, and we can elaborate on this another time, but are we sure that it's still going to be all the 11 personnel? Will we see a little more 12 with the two tight ends, one running back, because Mike Gesicki technically will be labeled as a tight end? I think that could happen this year.
Yeah, that's a topic that we should discuss. Something that we have discussed. I've brought up several times. I think they will, because Mike Gesicki is on the team, be a more 12 personnel because he will take some of those slot wide receiver snaps and just be a slot wide receiver labeled as a tight end, which you can decide to call it 12. You can call it big 11, whatever you want to call it. There's a reason I said more or less full participant in these practices.
Oh, no, I know. Yeah.
Talking about Burrow's participation. When you say that he's taking reps off, what does that look like for people? How do you identify? Yeah, that's a rep that Burrow would normally take, and he's sitting that one out this time.
When Browning's with and there aren't teams, right? There's no first team, especially with no Tee Higgins or Jamar Chase. But when the first team is out there, you see Jake Browning. Right. And it's not long. It was probably in real time, like 8 minutes where Burrow, maybe less, but where Burrow wasn't taking reps. And it was just probably the rest of that drill that whatever they were doing, it's like, yeah, I have enough reps at that. But then he was back in. I remember his next rep was a play action drill and a handoff drill, and then they went back to throwing. So I really just think it's almost load management, to use an NBA term, where it's the middle of May. Why overload the wrist and overthrow when you don't need to?
Yeah, this could very well just be planned management. It could be a particular type of movement that he doesn't want to do at this point in his rehab. I don't know what exactly the drills are that he's taking off, obviously. It could be that it's just, okay, let's take a break in the middle of practice for a few minutes every day. And they're just building that in. It could be Joe Burrow doing what we want Joe Burrow to do, which is not pushing it when things are a little tight or a little sore. And maybe it's none of those things. And it's just like we said, it's just planned and probably not anything to read into a ton, because what he's doing is what he told us the next step in his rehab was. Maybe not cleared for contact at this point. He said that he was expecting that to happen sometime in the next month, the last we heard from him. So that could or could not have happened. They're obviously not going to introduce contact for Joe Burrow in May. I don't even think that's allowed in the CBA anyway, but he's doing the throwing off platform that puts more load on the wrist to a significant degree in practices lately. It seems like almost every clip that was posted on social media of Joe Burrow throwing in this practice is him throwing off platform, moving left, moving right, moving up the middle directly toward the line of scrimmage, coming off play action. There are a few full platform throws, including the play action 55-yard or so air yards throw to Andrei Iosivas that was toward the end of practice. But a lot of off-platform work for Burrow as they continue to highlight and spend extra time on that part of his game, which Burrow had mentioned was a big step for him in his rehab that the Bengals have incorporated into practices as well.
And so how much of it is the plan from an offensive standpoint and on offense? How much of it is let's get Burrow, let's get Joe these reps? And that's what's tough, because it's good to have your quarterback be able to throw off platform. It doesn't mean that you're going to have 8 bootlegs a game and run a bunch of play action, but could it be implemented? Yes. And so I think it's tough right now at this stage to diagnose which one's which. What I will say is it's only May, and the fact that he's throwing 55 yards, the fact that he's throwing off platform and hitting Mike Gesicki and hitting Jermaine Burton. And there are other guys he's throwing to. I mentioned Trenton Irwin. Everyone keeps posting Burton and Gesicki because I think that's what the fans want to see. But he's throwing with all these guys, Cedric Jackson, plenty of others as well, catching passes from Joe Burrow. So it's good to see. It comes back to that, is the fact that we're here. We hadn't seen him throw a month ago, and heck, the draft hadn't even happened yet. But now we're draft over, and we're seeing him throw off platform and push the ball downfield and all of those things. It makes me feel good, because we still have over 2 months before training camp. And between now and then, how much better is he going to get? Obviously, he'll get better. And 3 months before, almost 3 months before preseason, just under 4 months before the start of the regular season, like, he has time to get from, let's say he's at 91% right now, and I'm just making up a number, to get to that 100%.
And he doesn't have Hayden Christensen, Anakin Skywalker hair.
Oh, yeah. Goodness. How many people do you think thought that was real? We're talking about a viral photo on social media where someone put the Anakin Skywalker hair on Joe Burrow from a media day pick from a few years ago.
At least like 6 people.
It's unbelievable, because it's way more than 6. It's unbelievable. Like, there's so many videos. He didn't just, one, you can tell even in the backwards hat that he doesn't have that hair. Like, what? I don't know.
It's hilarious.
It's the funniest thing ever. Yeah.
Anyway, you're right. It's good to see Joe Burrow back in practice, throwing deep, throwing on a line to the sideline, and timing patterns and out routes, throwing over the middle, throwing everything you would expect him to be throwing. There's no defense, offense on the field at this point. Everything is on air. So, takeaways are limited at this point. But to your point, seems like he's on schedule. Seems like everything's going well.
And he doesn't have that hair, because that would be a bad thing if he actually did.
Yeah, that's true. Coming up next, we have some more takeaways from the Bengals practice on Tuesday, including what the practice alignment of wide receivers who are in attendance, not Tee Higgins, not Jamar Chase, tells us about where the Bengals are looking for their slot receiver options.
Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with rising costs of inflation, to pay off your debt, pay off your mortgage, pretty much anything is standing in the way of you and financial freedom. Everyone wants that. And with Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools you need to help reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're seasoned or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Link your brokerage accounts For a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments, a comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com.
James, want to talk about these wide receivers and where they're working.
You want to talk about the receivers.
Well, before we get there, I know it's your favorite topic, but something else that you noticed.
That was a tease.
Something else that you noticed when the Bengals were getting ready for practice on Tuesday that no one else really pointed out on Twitter. So kudos to you for finding something that no one else found when everyone's watching the same practice. Was a little moment between Trey Hendrickson and Bengals owner Mike Brown before practice.
Yeah, Trey Hendrickson walked up to Mike Brown on the golf cart, shook his hand after stretching before the players broke off into positional drills. And oddly enough, shakes his hand, goes over there. Well, the defensive linemen were on the same field as Joe Burrow, just on the other side as the quarterbacks. And I took the video. Mike Brown was locked in on the defensive lineman, even though Joe Burrow is going through agility drills and throwing off platform to Mike Gesicki and other members of the staff. It's just pretty funny to look at. But yeah, it was cool to see. I would say that they're on the same page one way or the other. I think Trey understands, one, who's in charge, but two, what his options are or aren't.
Yeah, and going back to Trey Hendrickson's comments to the media last week, that certainly seems to be the case. Was that last week or was that 2 weeks ago now?
Last week. I know. It feels a while ago, doesn't it? Feels like forever ago. His trade request wasn't even a month ago yet.
That's why I interrupted myself to be like, man, is that what time is weird in May, apparently? But regardless, it seems like Trey and the Bengals, at least for now, are on the same page. And that's good news. Minor note there, but interesting nonetheless. And probably a good reminder from Mike Brown that while everyone is watching Joe Burrow do what Joe Burrow is doing, there are going to be 52 other guys on this roster, including half of the team on the defensive side of the ball. We're not going to heed that lesson, though, from Mike Brown watching the defensive line. We're going to talk about wide receivers for the next few minutes instead, because with Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins not in attendance, it really gives us an opportunity to focus on all these other players that are going to be contributing to the Bengals receiving core this year. And we talked about earlier the reference to Mike Gesicki's presence leading to potentially more 12 personnel, with Mike Gesicki playing the big slot role. And then what was interesting to me from a young receiver perspective was Jermaine Burton running the same routes in at least a couple of clips as Charlie Jones and as Trenton Irwin, guys that we would expect to be working in the slot, and Andrei Iosivas working almost exclusively, if not exclusively, on the boundary, and even going so far as to talk with, I think it was Charlie Clifford, in saying that he doesn't anticipate really being involved in that slot competition this year. So where, we talked about potentially Iosivas having a dog in that fight or being a participant in that competition, he doesn't expect to. So good to get confirmation there. Thought it was an outside chance, but thought there might be some involvement for him. But instead, Jermaine Burton, the guy that has some experience playing in the slot at Alabama, working with those slot receivers on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's what you hope to see. I think Jermaine, this is where he needs the most seasoning, right? And there was a clip on Monday of Burrow showing Jermaine little intricacies of a route that the Bengals released. And I think that's what he's learning now. We know he can run. He's got great hands. He can catch away from his body. He didn't have a drop last year. He's got the speed to get downfield. Great. How much are you going to be able to play slot in this offense? It's what they have to figure out between now and the start of the season. And I think it'll evolve as the season goes on. Charlie Jones, obviously, in that mix. Trenton Irwin in that mix. But I think, one, this means that they're confident in Mike Gesicki. Two, I think they are comfortable with Charlie Jones and his progress, because I don't really think Trenton Irwin's a big slot receiver. Like I know he could play there some, but I don't view him as a legit, like, would it shock you if Trenton Irwin played the most slot snaps on this team? It would shock me, like completely shock me if that was the case.
I think so. Yes. But like, what if it's like 139 versus 130 versus 125 or something? And it's,
Sure.
if it's by more than 100 snaps, yeah, that would be especially surprising because even in the past, like, yeah, he has worked in the slot some, but he's worked all over the place. He's not been an exclusively slot sub for this team.
Exactly. And so if you're Andrei and you're really not getting work in the slot, you're competing with Irwin for that next outside receiver job. And maybe Irwin signed here with the idea of there's no Tyler Boyd. I'm going to be the guy who can earn that starting job. Maybe that's what he's thinking. And so if so, well, you got to beat out Charlie Jones, certainly. You got to beat out Jermaine Burton, certainly. And I don't think that it would be a clean win for any of these guys, because what Burton is going to offer them is going to be much different than what Charlie Jones offers them. And it's going to be different what Jones offers them than what Irwin would, or Gesicki, for example. None of those guys have the size Gesicki has. So that's why we keep talking about the platoon. And it is good to know that, all right, so Andrei is outside. Makes sense, by the way. I think it makes a ton of sense. Now, where does Irwin fit into this pie? And is he ahead of these other guys? Is he ahead of Charlie Jones? I don't know. But I think that that's a question. And is Mike Gesicki ahead of all of them? He's still working with the tight ends, so it's not like we're seeing him work with the receivers right now.
Yeah, we'll get more answers, of course, as there's some, offense versus defense stuff at some point, and in training camp, obviously, and in preseason, certainly, where these guys are working will tell us a lot. Trenton Irwin, in the last 2 years, when he's actually played more than 100 snaps, you go back to 2021, he played 58 passing snaps, but in the last 2 years, he's been over 250 in both of those years. 41.5% of his snaps came in the slot as a receiver in 2022 on passing downs, and 34% were in the slot on passing downs in 2023. So not exclusively a slot player by any means, because Tyler Boyd has been on the team, and Tyler Boyd has largely been healthy for this team for the last few years. So where those slot snaps are going to come from, still a question, but working wide a significant amount of the time. And when you look at where his targets are coming, a lot of those are also coming from a wide alignment. So it will be interesting to see where Trenton Irwin is used, certainly, and where they're looking for those slot snaps. Because like you said, with that platoon idea, each of those players is going to be in there doing a different thing, but they have to all be good enough at the basics that you're not tipping your hand. Like Jermaine Burton's in the slot, so it's 989. You know that they want Jermaine Burton running a post. Or Jamar Chase is in the slot, so you know that it's an RPO with a bubble screen attached to it because Jamar Chase is in the slot and he's going to work behind whoever the receivers are outside of him on a trip side of the field or something like that. You got to be a little bit careful with your tendencies. And I think that's why ideally somebody steps into a role and says, you know what, I can do enough of these things that I'm going to be your slot receiver 70% of the time.
Yep.
And somebody takes that job and runs with it. But it also does help to have some versatility and some depth and rotation with different skill sets there.
I think Charlie is the one, because he took his lumps last year trying to learn this.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, wouldn't shock me. Just put it that way. Wouldn't shock me. It also wouldn't shock me if he's third behind Irwin and Burton. So it's really tough to handicap right now. And that's just of the receivers. Doesn't mean anything until you get into Gesicki and how he'll fit. So it's interesting. It's a storyline we're going to discuss a lot, and I'm not going to complain, Jake, because you know how much I love receivers.
Well, and Jamar is going to work in the slot. Yeah. And, we talk about Gesicki a lot. If Hudson makes a team, then I'm sure he will still have a role if he's active, and they're going to find things for him to do that he does better or differently than Mike Gesicki does, where Mike Gesicki is more of that vertical. Maybe he threatens man a little bit better. Maybe they're like Tanner Hudson, more underneath or working against zone, which is where he was really good last year. But Charlie Jones, by a percentage, perspective, just looking at last year, looking at what we would expect from him this year, they drafted him to learn and play the slot position. Ideally, he wins that job and is the Bengals' lion's share of the receiving snaps in the slot. But there will be snaps for Tanner Hudson. There will be snaps for Mike Gesicki. There will be snaps for Jamar Chase. There will be snaps for Tee Higgins. All of these guys will have their run in the slot, but dominantly, it will likely be Charlie Jones. Let's wrap up our Tuesday practice thoughts with the rest of the notes and miscellaneous topics from Tuesday's practice and news cycle coming up next.
Tee Higgins, not at Bengals offseason, not at their offseason program. Won't be there next week, breaking news, and has no plans to sign the franchise tender. Didn't we know this? Schefter had the report on Monday night, but didn't we know this, that this was going to happen?
We've been expecting for, I'm trying to figure out how long it's been, months certainly, that this was essentially going to be identical to the Jesse Bates path. Tee Higgins.
Can I break some news?
Sure.
I'm going to break news right now. I'm serious. Okay. Tee Higgins did not report for Bengals training camp, even though the rest of the team is at Paycor Stadium right now. Just clip that and save it for July 25th-ish.
Yeah.
It's already done. Yeah. I just reported it. I hope Schefter better credit me. I just did it. It's 2 months ahead of time. Better credit me.
I want the clip. I want ESPN to play the clip. Be like, you know what? I wanted to report that this was happening, but Locked On Bengals was on it 2 months ago.
When T was in Miami training. Get
him the suite for preseason game 3 when the Bengals host the Indianapolis Colts.
You can buy that. I'm not buying that.
I'm not buying it. I'm just like, somebody's gonna he's gonna be like, it's the same playbook.
T's Jake gonna said, come back. I'm not buying it.
T's gonna be back sometime after that third preseason game, right around that third preseason game. There's no and if there's an extension, that would be a huge upset. If he's back for training camp, that would be a huge upset. And this is just kind of status quo. But I guess technically speaking, there was not a pen to paper, so he won't be at OTAs. That's not really a surprise or really news, but it was reported. And so that's essentially, I mean, we've got a video. I just talked to Peter Bukowski for Locked On Sports today on our YouTube channel right now, where we talked about this topic for 5 minutes, and it turned into more future looking stuff for Tee Higgins. And so if you want more thought and discussion from, what Peter's questions were from a national perspective, you can go check that out. But from our perspective, covering the Bengals every day, this is nothing new for people who are everydayers. This is nothing new for people who have been listening to us talk about the Tee Higgins situation for months. It's just what was expected.
Oh, I just want to break more news. Tee Higgins still did not show up for camp. All right. There we go.
Let's cover the other notes, some other quick notes.
Is there anything else
here
to say about it? Sorry, I don't have much else. No,
that's why we're moving back.
He's working hard. He'll be fine. He'll be ready to go for September 8th or whatever it is.
I mean, Jamar Chase isn't there either. Who knows if he'll show up for OTAs?
Mandatory.
Is it mandatory? Is it mandatory?
Next week. Oh yeah.
I thought only minicamp was mandatory.
I don't know. They all bleed together. They're all called different names. It's so silly.
I mean, there's not even a significant.
No, it's difference. OTA. It's OTA.
Yeah. OTA.
Oh, mandatory mini camp is in June.
Separate.
So it's mandatory. Yeah. Guess who won't be? I'll break that news now too. Guess who won't be at mandatory mini camp? Tee Higgins is not at Paycor Stadium in June when mandatory mini camp starts.
Right.
Just saying.
Which is the last thing they do before they take their summer break.
Yeah, he will not be there.
The other notes to cover from Tuesday's practice, and there's more that we can get into later this week as there's time to do it. So some injury notes. DJ Ivy, Eric all continuing to work in their return from ACL injuries. taking steps in the right direction. Sounds like DJ Ivy thinks he's ahead of schedule, is very optimistic for his chances to be ready. Hopefully he's ready for, part of camp, and it's not a pupless situation for Ivy, because it was so exciting to see him come on late last year. Obviously, same true for Eric Hall. You want to see him be ready for the regular season. You want to see those guys be on track. Any other injury notes that stood out to you? You've been watching Tyson Anderson, I know, as well. I didn't see any reports on him.
No, he's good. Tyson's good. Tyson's in a good spot. I think he'll be ready for camp or shortly after camp, right? Where it's the Cheeto pup list for a day type scenario, and then he's back. I think that's the expectation. DJ was a little later in the season, so I think it's a little tougher. He didn't get surgery right away, but I do think he's trending in the right direction, and you hope he continues. I saw him going through drills, and looks good. It was a hot day, by the way. Yeah. This was like a training camp primer. It wasn't OTAs or anything. The training camp primer today, because it was hot out there. The sun was beating down, and these guys were putting in some good work.
Another question, I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit. We didn't talk about this before we started recording. Tanner McLaughlin, has he been working on the side? Has he been practicing?
He's still coming.
Core muscle.
Yeah, he's still coming back from the core muscle, I believe.
Okay.
So I haven't seen much of him.
Some other rookie notes just to close out the thoughts here on practice on Tuesday. Marius Mims and Matt Lee continuing to get some extra work in with Frank Pollock after practice. Mims also stays attached to Orlando Brown, working with him as a teammate in drills quite often. Mims also continuing to work with the first team as Trent Brown still not back for the offseason program. Any other rookie notes? I know we had a McKinley Jackson moving the sled, that specially designed low center of gravity sled. I think a Bill Callahan invention, actually, Brian's dad. A specialized sled, and McKinley Jackson getting under that and moving that sled pretty nicely. That was a Dan Horde observation. Any other rookie notes?
Cam Grandy is wearing number 85.
I
was literally at practice and I was like, who's wearing number 85? I knew it wasn't McLaughlin. Obviously, I know the tight ends on the team. I'm like, who is that? And I was like, oh, it's Cam Grandy, undrafted free agent. So there you go. That's a fun way to end it. We start the segment with Tee Higgins didn't show up. Old 85. New 85 did show up.
There you go. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We'll have, of course, more content for you here to wrap up the week as the Bengals get closer to OTAs. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.